This is an ad by BetterHelp. BetterHelp recently surveyed over 16,000 people and found that while 75% of people believe it's wise to seek support, only 27% of Americans are in therapy, and people stay silent to avoid being judged. BetterHelp has over 10 years of experience matching you with the right therapist. Because we're all better with help. Visit BetterHelp.com/stopthestigma for their first ever State of Stigma report, the latest in mental health research.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine. And maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them. From disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hey, warm-up from the low. Welcome to Love You Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you, as we're going to be joined in a few minutes by Paul Fritschner. He does such great work over at the Big East Digital Network, taking a look at this great game of college basketball that we all know and love. We've got quite a few big-time NBA draft decisions that are on deck, so we're going to be talking about those with them, some of the teams that have been so intriguing this offseason, the middle part of the Big East, and so much more. And then in the final segment, I'm going to give you guys a recap of the news and notes we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. If you do like hearing from his fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. And if you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, name does not matter, size per usual. Please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Do not get in any Twitter/X questions, but everything is powered by Edge Boost on this podcast. Over at Edge Boost, they're making sure that bettors are able to access their funds 24/7, 365 on leap years, 366 days out of the year, because they are able to make sure that bettors are able to access their funds whenever they need to. And when you go to edgeboost.bet, utilize that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That gives you a dollar for dollar match on your first deposit of up to $25. That's edgeboost.bet, promo code GREG. Now let's talk with our good friend Paul Fritschner. He does great work over at the Big East Digital Network. He is out there covering the Xavier Musketeers, as well as I know that he's based out there in Cincinnati, and he does a great job with the podcast, The Rebound Rundown, as well. You're able to follow him on Twitter/X at his first and last name, Paul Fritschner. That last name is spelled Fritschner. And Paul, great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Absolutely. As always, Greg, great to talk to you tonight.
Always great to have you aboard, Paul. And Paul, we've got ourselves a lot of NBA draft decisions. And just how do you take a look at what we've got right now in college basketball? Because the main transfer portal wave is done, but I feel like with these NBA draft decisions that are going to be coming down the line here in the next few days, it could lead to a second wave, because a lot of these guys that are determining whether or not to stay in the draft, they're also in the portal.
Yeah, absolutely. You look at some of these guys, and even guys that aren't necessarily in the draft. You look at a guy like Desmond Claude, who's taken a visit to Alabama, one of the bigger names that's still left in the portal. There are still portal decisions that have yet to be made, still rosters that need to be filled out. And the other half of that, Greg, that's kind of interesting, or really interesting to me, is that you can start reporting to school here. Well, really, you can start reporting at any time now here in the month of May, now that school's over. But as far as actual summer workouts go, those will start happening here in the first week of June for the 8-week summer programs at most of these colleges. So if you're a player and you need to make a decision on where you're going to play your college basketball next season, you're going to have to do it here really soon if you don't want to fall behind on your summer programs.
Yep, no question about it. And in terms of just taking a look at the portal as well, how much do you think that there's an added urgency for these guys to sign on right now? Because when it came to last season, these guys that waited a long time, like Coleman Hawkins and company, they were able to get big-time bags from teams that were just desperate to spend their money. But this offseason, the guys like PJ Haggerty and company that waited a little bit longer, they didn't quite get those rewards.
Yeah, I think what you saw this year in the portal was that a lot of teams spent a lot of their money right away early on, because there's so much uncertainty right now with this house settlement. Some collectives are going away, and so these schools had money that they needed to spend. And a lot of these players were getting numbers that were crazy inflated, and schools were having to spend early on because maybe a school had to overspend for a player because they knew that if they didn't do it right there, it might go to somebody else, and they didn't want to lose out on a player. And so this offseason, players got paid in a big way. And I'm really curious to see if there's any kind of legislation that happens here this offseason, or if the House settlement goes into effect and has the effect that a lot of people seem to think it will, where next season maybe the numbers aren't so high. But Greg, I don't know about that, because it's really hard in the society in which we live, where you see players making the money that they're making to all of a sudden have to backtrack and say, you guys can't make that kind of money anymore. You see it in baseball and Major League Baseball. Like, it's hard to put the genie back in the bottle.
Yep, it really is. And my goodness, it is going to be so interesting to see what happens with regards to these guys over the next few weeks. As Paul Fritschner, he does such great work over at the Big East Digital Network. I know that he's doing some great podcast work as well. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And Paul, when you take a look at the actual decisions themselves that are of big impact, which ones are you watching the most right now? Because there's quite a few guys I think could be able to swing a team's fortune that are currently considering the NBA draft.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, because a lot of these names that are, deciding, do they go, do they stay? I'm looking at, some of these top names that it's hard for me to sit here and pick apart some of these, to where I think to myself, if you look at a player that right now, you look at somebody like, at the top, obviously like a VJ Edgecombe at Baylor, who obviously is going to stay in the draft, Trey Johnson at Texas, guys that if they had come back to their school would have seriously changed their roster, right? But you go all the way down the list. I'm fascinated, Greg, and I'm really struggling here to think of one that sticks out to me. Thomas Sorber maybe was a name that I would have said, but Sorber sounds like he's set in the draft. Sorber to me was the biggest name, but that's one to where I say he's going to stay in. At least that's what he said last week. So now that completely changes the dynamic of Georgetown's roster, especially coming from the perspective of the Big East and the schools that I cover pretty closely. Sorber had a chance to basically make Georgetown a tournament team next year. I don't know what Georgetown is going to be now that he's not coming back to school. So at least from my perspective and my job and the teams that I cover, Sorber was the name that sticks out. Now, I mentioned some of those names, like Edgecombe's going to be a top 5 pick. Trey Johnson's going to be a top 10 pick. Those guys aren't coming back to school, and they didn't really have a decision to make. But Sorber, to me, kind of that middle of the first round type of talent, I thought he might go back. Turns out he's going to stay in the draft.
Yep, with Thomas Sorber, I was sort of thinking that he was going to be staying in the draft as well, but I think that it's going to be really interesting to see what Georgetown does without him moving forward. And Paul, I think you know this as well as I do. It just feels like even with Sorber staying in the draft, the middle teams in the Big East, like I would consider Xavier to be one of those teams, Georgetown, Butler, it feels like they've all had relatively good off seasons.
Yeah, no doubt. And I do want to double back. One name that just popped into my head that I didn't mention there was Yaxel Landenborg, who is transferring from UAB up to Michigan. That's another name that you got to keep in mind as to whether he was going to, stay in the draft or not. That's a huge name that obviously Michigan was, very excited to get. But yeah, you talk about the Big East and some of those teams that have had nice off seasons. I agree with you. I think Georgetown, I thought Georgetown had a pretty good off season as well, but a lot of that is Thomas Sorber going to come back? And now that he's not, I'm really questioning what Georgetown's roster is going to be next year and if it's going to be able to compete the same way that I initially thought that it might. UConn, St. John's, we know what they are. They're going to be the top end of the Big East. Creighton as well. But that middle portion of the Big East is going to be really interesting next year.
Oh, no question about it. It's Paul Fritschner, who does great work over at the Big East Digital Network, along with his great podcast work and so much more. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And Paul, it certainly is interesting in terms of some of these guys are out there in the NBA draft. Cedric Howard, I think, is such an interesting one as well, because typically, you know this as well as I do. These guys that they enter in the transfer portal, they declare a school, but they still go through the draft process 99.99999% of the time. They actually transfer to that school. Cedric Howard, a little bit of a different case, and I think that's curious if we might see a little bit more of this moving forward.
Yeah, that's a great example. Somebody that, end of the first round type of talent, and that's a guy that it's a great example, great way to say it. And the other thing too that you have to think about with the way that college basketball sits right now, just as a sport in general, is that these players, not that they didn't before, but they have a true decision to make now, because a lot of these players, Greg, can make more money going back to college than they would maybe if they're top end of the second round or low end of the first round. Maybe some of these guys are making millions in college that they wouldn't necessarily make if they stay in the NBA draft and then have to get signed after the draft. Maybe they go to the summer league, they get picked up, they're at the back end of a roster, or they sign a two-way deal, they end up in the G League, whatever it might be. You can stay in college and get a bag. And that's fascinating to me as a sport to see this decision-making process play itself out.
Yep, it certainly is so interesting. And I feel like with regards to the draft decisions that we've seen over the last few days, there have been a lot of beneficiaries in terms of guys that are returning to school, like Ruben Chinyelu going on over to Florida, I thought was a very big one. And we saw a few other guys that they decided that they were just going to go back to where they came as well. And I feel like this has been a lot of good news thus far, including Devin McLaughlin. That's another good one, returning to Vanderbilt. And I feel like there have been a lot more winners than losers thus far in the draft process.
Yeah, and Florida is a great example of that. You want sustainability when you're Florida. You're coming off a national championship. You built a great team at Florida out of the portal. You got a home run in a guy like Walter Clayton, Elijah Martin, just a really talented roster, trying to build on that, trying to make sure that you can go out and sustain that success. And when you're in the SEC, which is coming off a historically great season and is set up for probably another, who knows if they're going to be as good as they were last year as a conference, but they're set up to be pretty good again next year. If you're Florida, you got to sustain that, or at least try to sustain it as best you can. You have a young coach, just got a contract extension. You have a great, analytics staff, as you might say, a coaching staff that really prides itself on analytics and has kind of changed the game as far as what they value there, and proving that it can win a national championship. That's a great example there in the Florida Gators.
Yep, and with the Florida Gators, the way that they've been able to utilize the transfer portal these last few seasons is big as well, because I just take a look at the example that they've been able to lend us of being able to keep guys for multiple years, and I think that needs to be the model for so many of these teams, because while these one-year rental guys are nice, these teams that have been able to keep their transfers for multiple years, go back to UConn and their back-to-back national titles, and these are the teams that seem to be winning big in college basketball right now.
There has to be, as much as you can do in the portal, there has to be continuity. There has to be. And yeah, if you're Florida, you go out and you get Xavier Lee, one of the best transfers available in the portal. You're losing some major, major players in Walter Clayton, Elijah Martin, Will Richard, but you're losing them, either to the draft, graduation, whatever it might be. You're losing guys that you got to replace, and you go out and you do it in the portal with Xavier Lee. And that's why I'm really interested in a team like Marquette, Shaka Smart, that just refuses outright to use the portal at all. Sometimes I wonder if Marquette maybe just added one piece out of it. You don't have to redo your entire roster. Marquette is trying to do it the old-fashioned way of, let's go out, let's do this without picking up any transfers. We're just going to do this like we've always done it. That's great. But sometimes it's okay to also get one complementary piece to add to that roster. And for as much as these players are concentrated on finding what they can do, maximize their own value, the teams have to look out for themselves as well. They have to be able to go out, build a roster, do whatever they can to sustain success. And if they do that well, they're sustaining success because they're retaining players year over year. There's data to back this up. Evan Mia does a great job with it. And he's been pretty active and vocal about that on social media here this offseason, that it's not rocket science, but the teams that are having the most success right now are teams that, they might not have guys that stick around for 4 years, but they're sticking around for 2 years, 3 years. Here at Xavier, you look at Richard Pitino and what he did at New Mexico over the last couple of seasons. You have Donovan Dent, you have True Washington, Nelly Jr. Joseph was there. You go down the list, Mustafa Mzeal, guys that have been there and contributed at a high level and spent multiple years in the program, getting to know the system, developing, becoming better players. That just goes to show that if you keep transferring and you keep trying to hit a home run with one-year guys in the portal, it doesn't always work out.
Yep, it certainly does not. And that's been a big takeaway of mine over the last few seasons. And that leads into this, Paul. Who are a few teams that you take a look at their moves in the offseason and you just feel like those teams are going a little bit under the radar and you like what they've done, maybe more so than the mainstream media does?
Yeah, one team I'm very interested to see how they do because they had to go heavy into the portal is North Carolina. They picked up Jonathan Powell, who was a West Virginia transfer, had a great season at West Virginia. But Henry Vassar's going there from Arizona. Jaden Young, Kyan Evans is going there from Colorado State. They have some serious contributors out of the portal, and that's off a season where they lost a lot of guys as well. Elliot Cadeau is gone, among a bunch of others. So that's a name. Now, obviously, they're a big brand, obviously one of the biggest in the sport. So you'd say maybe they're not going under the radar with that, but more so just interested to see how they do. And then staying in the ACC, another one, Jai Lucas. I just mentioned True Washington. He has to build this roster from the ground up. What does Miami look like? Maybe not this year, but 2 years from now. A couple of ACC teams there because the SEC gets so much love. The Big Ten gets so much love. We talk about a lot about the Big East and the Big 12. The ACC has struggled. I know they had a historically good Duke team that should be set up for some sustained success. But what does the rest of the conference look like? NC State with Will Wade, a great hire there, and bringing in Terrence Arsenault from Houston, Trey Holloman from Michigan State, Alan Breed, who's bounced around. Just some guys that I really am excited to watch in the ACC this year, which you put excited and ACC in the same sentence last year, Greg. I don't know if you would have said I was a serious ball knower.
Well, they made some great coaching hires as well. And personally, I think that that's where it all starts for the ACC because they lost so many of their legendary coaches being able to hire on to Will Wade over at NC State. I think that Jai Lucas, though, that's not necessarily the splashiest of names, that's going to be able to work out for Miami. And I think that that's where it all starts, especially with Virginia getting in Mr. Odom, where we know that his father had some success over there as well. I think that the ACC got it right with those hires this offseason.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think Will Wade is a home run of a hire at NC State.
And what else is a home run is being able to get you aboard, Paul. You do such a great job taking a look at this great game of college basketball. I know you've got a few podcasts running. I know you do a great job with the Big East Digital Network. And if I'm not mistaken, you did a little bit of baseball last year as well. So let the good people at home know what's on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, I do a podcast here in the off season. Well, I do it every day during the season, but in the off season, I do it as well. It's called the Rebound Rundown. It's just a daily during the season podcast that gives you a quick what you need to know rundown of the day in college hoops. And I'm doing some interviews and stuff like that throughout the off season as well. So be sure to check in on that. It's called the Rebound Rundown.
Absolutely. And Paul, he's doing such an amazing job taking a look at this great game of college basketball. So big thanks to Paul for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming up next, let's recap all the news and notes that we saw in college basketball Monday.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine. And maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them. From disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always a pleasure to be joined by Paul Fritschner. He does great work over at the Big East Digital Network, does great work over there at Xavier Athletics, and so much more. Taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Every single time he joins me, learns such great insights, and he did so once again today. So a big thanks to Paul for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you a roundup of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours, and we saw a few NBA draft decisions with one very notable one. Devin McLaughlin, he is going to be heading back to Vanderbilt. He has decided that he is going to be withdrawing from the NBA draft after last year he was their top rebounder, 10.3 points, 7.9 rebounds per game. So I feel like that's very rock solid for a Vanderbilt team that it's been solid in terms of what they've added here in the transfer portal. They obviously are going to have a new look backcourt from a season ago, but they've done a nice job being able to add some pieces. It feels like this is a team that's very much in the image of what Mark Byington really wants, and they're going to be a little bit more rock solid down low with having a 6'8" combo player. Tyler Harris is able to pop it from three. Mason Mason Nicholson is a relatively good rebounder along Jalen Washington as well. So a Vanderbilt team that last year was struggling a little bit on the glass. Aside from McLaughlin, you're going to have a little bit more help. This is going to be a much more well-rounded team, so absolutely love to see that. So that's a big one. You saw Silas Demery, he had already committed to UConn. He was relatively rock solid over at Georgia last season. He decided that he was going to withdraw from the draft, and he is going to be heading on over to UConn. These guys that they make up their mind in the transfer portal, for the most part, typically withdraw from the NBA draft. Cedric Howard is a little bit of a different situation, as he's leaning a little bit more to staying in the draft rather than going to Duke, where he was going to be transferring to, because he just shot off the charts at the combine. But still, that's typically the norm with these guys, that they commit to a school. As Demery, 13.5 points per contest last season, have to figure that he's going to be able to elevate that backcourt over there at UConn. And then you saw Ruben Chinyelu decide that he is going to be returning to Florida. This is not too much of a surprise for Chinyelu. He was rock solid for Florida last season, don't get me wrong. He was able to give the team right around about 6.5 rebounds per game. Not too much of a scorer, though. Like, he could be a solid, shot blocker in the NBA, be able to give you some defense and everything like that, but still not necessarily completely unlocked with regards to his game. So he's going to be heading back to Florida, a Florida team that they lose much of that backcourt from a season ago, but that front court, you're going to have most of those guys returning. So that is something that is going to be big. And you saw this guy decide that he is going to be withdrawing from the transfer portal. Sebastian Robinson, he was over at NJIT this last season. He was averaging right around about 12 points per contest. He's going to be going back to NJIT, and for NJIT, it was a relatively rough season last year. Let's not lie here. But you know what? Being able to get back a guy like this who's able to average 12 points per contest, that's a good place to be able to start. They're going to be bringing back a few of those pieces from down low, which obviously they have a lot of work to do there. And this is an NJIT team that was a bottom 15 team pretty much in most metrics in all of college basketball. But I like this offseason that they've had with being able to get back Sebastian Thomas. That's going to be able to help them out quite a bit. But additionally, they've added a few pieces in the transfer portal. It's not like it's been a massive haul or anything like that, but they've done a nice job being able to mix and match. And I do think that for NJIT, things are looking a little bit better for them moving forward, especially if they can get something out of Jeremy Clayville, who's going to be coming on over from St. Francis of Pennsylvania. Toledo is the beneficiaries of IU Indy having a late coaching change here in the offseason, as Sean Craig, he was one of the main guys over at IU Indy last season, 6'7", a little bit of a combo player that shot 37.5% from three, 12 points, 7 boards, a steal per contest. He has decided that he is going to be gone on over to Toledo, and for Toledo, he very much fits the system. When they've got these 6'5", 6'6" guys that are able to pop it from three, that's when they're really at their most effective, and he comes from a system in which didn't play a whole lot of defense, so he'll be able to fit in very well with Toledo. And for Toledo, it's been a little bit of a muted offseason for them, and just in general, the MAC, man, they have fallen on some tough times. But for Toledo, being able to have this ad, I really do like that for them. They're bringing in Rodney Johnson, who was over at Tennessee Tech this past season. They're looking at Kyler Vanderjack coming on over from Central Michigan as well. They're looking to revamp things after last year. Things were just not great for them. They didn't necessarily have the three-point shooting that they're accustomed to. So being able to get this ad, I think that is going to be rock solid for them, and they're going to be able to build themselves up moving forward. Ike Cornish, he began his career over at Maryland along with Ohio, just has never really panned out after being a top 250 recruit last season, was limited to 9 games over at Nichols, was able to average 7.5 points per contest. He's decided that he is going to be going on over to James Madison. This is a little bit of a more upside get for James Madison, as for the Dukes, they've been able to do a relatively solid job here in the last few weeks of getting onto the board with some transfers. It was a little bit slow going for them towards the beginning part of the offseason, but now you've got Bradley Douglas, who's coming on over from Georgia Southern. He's a nice double-figure scorer. Cliff Davis is a guy that's able to do a nice job doling out the ball. What I think is going to be big for Cornish as well is that he was part of Nichols' team that was pretty rock solid on defense last season. When it comes to Preston Spradlin coach teams, he always liked these defense-oriented guards, and I think that he's going to be able to fit that mold as well. Again, we'll see how healthy he's able to stay, but I mean, this is a guy that coming out of high school had quite a bit of upside, and we'll see if he's ever able to live up to that, but I do like that for James Madison. And then I do like this one as well. You've got Marcus Overstreet. He was over at Mercer this last season, about 6 points, 5.5 rebounds per game. He's decided that he's going to go on over to San Jose State, and when San Jose State was really able to reach their peak a few seasons ago under Tim Miles. They had a bunch of really good big men, and you can tell that San Jose State is looking to get back to their roots. As the last few seasons, it was a little bit less than tremendous, and for San Jose State, you've got a bunch that has been able to do a relatively solid job here in the transfer portal, as they've added a few guys like a Kobe Garland over at Longwood. I like what he's able to bring to the table. Yafat Mundi was at Iona last season. He at 6'8" is able to give you some rebounding. Marcus Overstreet is going to be nice in that front court, and then Adrian Myers, who is stuck on the bench over at Mississippi State, he's coming in as well. So nice little bit of a portal haul for them. I feel like they could use a guard or two, but overall, I do think that that's relatively solid. This is a nice add as well. Ben Johnson, he was over at Bellarmine. He was limited to just 18 games due to injury. He averaged about 11.5 points per contest for his career, a high 33-point shooter. He's decided that he is going to go on over to Vermont. For Vermont, it was just a miserable year in general for them on the offensive side of things. Being able to add a guy like this that's able to pop it and lock it from three, and then having the TJs coming back, TJ Hurley, TJ Long, they should be nice in the backcourt for this upcoming season. They're adding in their Jackson Skipper, who he began his career at Vermont, went on over to Oral Roberts to get a few more minutes. Down low, Ben Michaels comes on over from Buffalo. Really like what they've got going on here. Gus Yeldon, he was a former top 150 recruit that comes in from Seton, also a good add by Vermont. And they also add in there Chris Kumezka. He was over at Loyola Maryland this last season, 6.5 points per contest. Another guy that dealt with a little bit of injury like Ben Johnson, so they're looking for a little bit of upside with regards to these two guys, but I do think that they're going to get it, and I think that these are worthwhile moves for Vermont. And then this is a good one, D.A. Houston. He was over at Coastal Carolina this last season. He was unfortunately only able to play in one game due to injury, but that said, when he last played a full season, that was 2 seasons ago over at Longwood, was averaging about 6.5 points per contest. He was able to do a nice job of being able to dole out the ball. He has decided that he is going to be going on over to Texas A&M Corpus Christi, and for Corpus Christi, I think that this bunch is going to be able to have themselves a relatively nice year, have been one of the better teams in terms of generating turnovers in college basketball. They haven't added a lot of guys, but Nicholas Shamboyo, he's going to be coming on over from Denver as well. He was a nice double-figure scorer, doesn't necessarily play the defense that you're looking for out of Corpus Christi, but for Corpus Christi, I do think that they're going to be able to find their sea legs. They've done a nice job of being able to mix and match here with those two guys in the portal. Would like to see them add a little bit more size because Corpus Christi has been one of the better rebound rate teams in the mid-major ranks, and they are going to be losing a little bit of that front court from a season ago, but I think that that is a nice add for them. This is a solid add as well, as Norfolk State is going to be bringing in Anthony McComb III, who was over at New Hampshire last season as a part of a team that just quite frankly didn't have a lot. He was able to give them 13 points per contest. We'll need to see if he was just a big fish in a small pond or if it was a case where someone had to give minutes for New Hampshire and he just so happened to be that guy. But for Norfolk State, I think that this is a nice add for them. And over the last few weeks, Norfolk State has done a nice job of being able to build up this team. They are going to have a little bit of that backcourt returning from the season ago, but after they really didn't have a lot of rebounding over the last few seasons, they've done a nice job of being able to beef up. This one is going to be obviously helping out the backcourt a little bit more, but bringing in a guy like Davon Ellis, a 6'6" combo player from Valparaiso, I think it's solid. Deion Wright Ford, he's a 6'4", little bit of a combo guard from Texas A&M Corpus Christi is nice. Keontae Lewis at 6'9" should be able to help them out down low, and Elijah Jamerson was a nice 3-point shooter over at UNC Wilmington along the UW Milwaukee. So I do like this move for them, and this will be able to add a little bit more depth there. You've got Mikal Worthy Jr. He was over at UMass this last season, about 6 points, 2 assists per contest. He has decided that he is going to be going on over to UC Riverside. Solid move for UC Riverside. It's been a rough offseason for them. When you lose a coach like Mike Pio, you know that it's going to be a little bit rough because I think that he's one of the more underrated coaches in all of college basketball. They have to replace that dynamo backcourt that they had from a season ago, and there's no easy way of being able to do so. Now, we'll say with Worthy, he's got absolutely no 3-point shooting whatsoever, so that's not going to be able to help them out, but they brought in Denzel Hines, who is a relatively good big man for Coastal Carolina. He's able to give you a little bit of rebounding. I can tell that this team is going to be cut from a little bit of a different cloth with BJ Coley coming on over from Montana State. You've had a lot of size coming in for UC Riverside. Probably going to be lacking a little bit more in the backcourt than they have in past years, but likely going to be just a skoge better with regards to their overall low post play, and this is a team that's looking to be able to just muscle up a little bit more as well. Curie Carvey, he last season was over at Morehead State at 6'9". He was able to do a nice job, averaging about 4.5 points, 4 boards per contest. He has decided that he is going to be going for Morehead State, and he's going to be going to NC Central. Nice ad for an NC Central team that last season. They were really good in terms of their offensive rebound rate. In terms of their defensive rebound rate, they were allowing a whole bunch of second and third chances. Really didn't have a lot of size down low is more of a mix and match front court. And for NC Central, I think that this is a step in the right direction for them, as they also bring in Kyrick Davis, a nice double-figure scorer from West Georgia. That was announced within the last 72 or so hours. So you're noticing a lot of these MEAC teams starting to get on the board with a few transfers. And Winthrop, they get on the board as they're signing in New Mexico State's Eduard Nicomo. Hopefully I said that correct. He at 6'10", was able to give the team about 4.5 rebounds per contest while he was over at Georgia State. Last season was in a little bit more of an ancillary role, but for Winthrop, I think that this is a really good ad for them. And for Winthrop in general, this is a bunch of, has a bad free throw shooting, so he's going to be able to fit in very well with them. But Winthrop, I think, has done a nice job of being able to reinvent themselves. Back when they had Pat Kelsey, obviously, it was a dynamic backcourt team, and they've added in there Dalen Berry, who was over at Charleston Southern this past season. Kareem Rozier coming on over from Duquesne. I think that that's a relatively nice get. Now they're going to be able to beef up a little bit more down low. This is a team that's looking to play a little bit more of a high-octane style. They were one of the quickest teams in terms of possessions per game last season. Being able to bring in a guy like a Nicomo is going to be able to allow them to get some second and third chances, so I think that that's a good pickup for them. Alfred Worrell Jr., he was over at Southern Miss this last season, averaged about 6.5 points per contest. He has decided that he is going to be going to Morgan State. Morgan State, a little bit slow going here in the transfer portal, but being able to get this one up on the board, I think is going to be relatively solid for them. Morgan State, just in general, has not been able to just come to the forefront in general, and this is going to be really their first Division I transfer ad. They're bringing in a few guys from like the junior college ranks, what have you, and you're always going to be finding that with the MEAC, these flag teams, what have you. But I do think that this is going to be relatively solid for a bunch that, let's call it what it is, their defense was just absolutely abysmal last season. So they're going to need to do a little bit of a better job with that regard. But you're bringing in someone that is able to give you a little bit of something from the backcourt. And last season he was shooting about 33% from three-point range. So relatively solid. You should be able to translate to the MEAC game quite well. This guy should be able to translate to Lemoyne quite well, as well as you've got Amateri Moss. He last season was over at North Florida. He was able to average for them about 2.5 assists, 5.5 points per contest, and he was a guy that 2 seasons ago was averaging more like 10.5 points and a steal per game. He's decided that he's going to be going on over to Lemoyne. Was a bit of a slow go of it in the offseason for Lemoyne, but I like this pickup, and they've had a few other ones over the last few days. Ja'Kai Sanders, who comes in from St. Peter's, should be able to improve that defense. And then Tennessee Rainwater, one of the most interesting names in college basketball, coming on over from Utah Tech, should help out a team that, since they entered the D1 ranks, have been one of the worst in terms of rebounding in all of college basketball. You see that a lot with these transitionary Division I schools because they just don't have the, shall we say, athletes that you typically expect at the Division I level. So that is a good pickup for them, and it feels like things are moving in the right direction for Lemoyne. Falou Diongé, hopefully I said that correct. He was over at Western Kentucky over the last 2 seasons, was just really hampered by injuries. He was only able to get out there on the floor for a few games each of the last 2 seasons. He, during the 2022-23 season over at Western Kentucky, was able to give the team right around about 2.5 points per contest. He has decided that he is going to be going to Southern Miss. Southern Miss, a team that has been really struggling on the glass over the last few seasons. I think that this is going to be another nice one for them, and for Southern Miss, really their second big pickup that they've had over the last 24 hours. So you do like to be able to see that. And then Chaz Kelly, who was over at Boston College this last season, he was averaging 4.5 points per contest. He has decided that he is going to be going to Georgia Tech. For Georgia Tech, a little bit of an interesting team because you've obviously got the familiarity here with Kelly staying within the ACC, and for this Georgia Tech unit, I do think that they are going to be able to just build up a little bit from what we've seen over the last few seasons, as I thought that Damon Stoudemire was a relatively good pickup, and they've been able to do a nice job of adding some talent here in the past few off seasons, bringing Cam Kraft, a really nice sharpshooter from Miami of Ohio, I think is big. Lamar Washington needs to cut down on the turnovers, but has some upside. Began his career at Texas Tech. He put up good numbers over at Pacific from an individual standpoint last season. Now you had in there a guy like Kelly, who certainly wasn't like some dynamo scorer or anything like that, but a relatively good defender, 6'5". He's able to pop it from three-point range, so I think that he's going to be able to help them out in ACC, which I do feel like they're in the bottom of it as of right now, so they do need to have a few more pickups. And then Josh Pickett, he was over at Denver this last season, was averaging about 5.5 points, a little bit over 2 rebounds per game. He's decided that he is going to be going to Presbyterian for the Blue Hosts. Not a lot here in the offseason thus far for them, but you know what, this is a sign of things going in the right direction, as Presbyterian, they last season were actually a relatively okay team on the glass. They had some nice 3-point shooting, but defense was really lackluster. Now, Denver really doesn't play any defense whatsoever, so they're not going to be getting some versatile defender. But for Presbyterian, they also are bringing in Jeremiah Israel from Northern Kentucky, Eric Taylor from Sam Houston State, so they're really starting to build up that backcourt, and we're really starting to be able to build up a gauge of what we're able to expect this upcoming college basketball season. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, Larry ZM, name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like here on this podcast via that 5-star review. Big thanks once again to Paul Fritschner. He does great work over at the Big East Digital Network and the Rebound Rundown podcast. He joined me in the live segment, and I'm coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.